It all began with the ring, a small, seemingly trivial detail. Jessica's wedding band, the one she used to spin absent-mindedly on her finger whenever she was lost in thought, had vanished. It wasn't misplaced, just missing. One evening, while we were watching TV, I noticed her bare hand. She used to take pride in that ring, a simple platinum band with a diamond that caught the light just right. It wasn't on the coffee table, the kitchen counter, or the nightstand where she normally left it when she cleaned or showered. "Where's your ring?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Without turning her head, her eyes glued to her phone again. I had come to despise that device. She replied, "It's at the jeweler's." Her answer was too quick. It needed to be resized. I frowned. A resize? After 7 years? She shrugged, finally glancing up with a hint of annoyance in her eyes. "Yeah, fingers change, don't they?" I didn't press further, though her explanation made no sense. Her fingers hadn't changed. She was the same Jessica. In fact, she seemed fitter, more polished lately. She'd been going to the gym more often, spending extra time in front of the mirror, experimenting with new looks. I thought she was doing it for herself, maybe to break the monotony of routine. But now, that missing ring planted a nagging suspicion in my mind. 2 weeks later, I found my first real clue. Jessica mentioned she'd be out late with a new networking group. I'm not typically the jealous type and never minded when she wanted to see friends or attend events alone. But this time, something felt off. I decided to probe. "Oh, nice. Which group is it?" I asked as casually as possible. Her reply came too quickly. "Just some coworkers. You wouldn't know them." I hadn't expected specific names, but her dismissive tone irritated me. Jessica usually shared every little detail about her life, sometimes to the point of oversharing. Now, her responses were short and guarded. The following Saturday, I decided to drop by her networking group without warning. I did my research, checked her planner, and noted her favorite new restaurants. I had a hunch where she'd be. When I walked into the bar, I saw her immediately, not with a group or even a coworker. She was leaning into a man I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his arm, her laughter, too loud and overly familiar. For a moment, I froze, unable to believe it. This isn't happening. But then she touched his face, her fingers grazing his cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. Something inside me snapped. I didn't confront her. Instead, I stayed hidden, observing the way they spoke, how close they stood, how her lips lingered near his ear. She wasn't just cheating, she was comfortable with him. When she kissed him, I turned and left. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the scene over and over, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. By the time I got home, Jessica was already in bed. Her phone sat on the counter, glowing softly with notifications. For the first time in our relationship, I picked it up. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, and there it was. His name. Mark. Flirty text that left no doubt. Inside jokes she hadn't shared with me in years. But the one that crushed me was simple. "Can't wait to see you again tonight. You're worth the risk." She knew I'd left the party early and thought I was just angry. But I was planning my revenge. The next morning, I woke before Jessica. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, I stared blankly out the window. My thoughts raced, cycling through ways to confront her, all the words I wanted to throw at her. But no, that would be too easy, too satisfying for her. She didn't deserve easy. Jessica entered the kitchen around 9, her hair tousled, wearing my sweatshirt over her leggings like everything was normal. My jaw tightened. I wanted to scream, demand answers. Instead, I stayed composed. "Not yet." "Morning," she said, her tone light and carefree. She grabbed her favorite mug and poured coffee, humming some silly tune. I couldn't stop myself. "How was the networking event last night?" Her hand froze for a second, so subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. She quickly recovered, facing me with a fake smile I longed to wipe off her face. "Good. Lots of small talk, you know." "Yeah," I said, swirling my coffee. "Funny thing, I was in the area last night. Thought I might drop by, but I couldn't find you." Her smile flickered. "Oh, we left early and went somewhere quieter to talk." The lies flowed smoothly, like a second language. It made me sick. Right, I replied, holding her gaze. She looked away, first, pretending to sip her coffee. That's when I saw it. Her red dress from last night tossed on the chair by the door, wrinkled and carelessly discarded. A faint, dark smudge marked the collar. Lipstick. Jessica only ever wore nude shades. I walked over, picked up the dress. She stiffened. You're getting sloppy, Jess, I said, my voice low. Her head snapped up, confusion flashing across her face before she regained her practiced calm. What's that supposed to mean? I held up the dress, pointing at the stain. It all started with the ring, a seemingly insignificant detail. Jessica's wedding band, the one she often spun around her finger absent-mindedly when deep in thought, was gone. It wasn't misplaced, it was just missing. One night, while we were watching TV, I noticed her bare finger. She used to love that ring, a simple platinum band with a diamond that caught the light perfectly. It wasn't on the coffee table, the kitchen counter, or the nightstand where she usually left it when cleaning or showering. Where's your ring? I asked, keeping my tone even. Without looking up from her phone, a device I was beginning to despise, she answered, It's at the jeweler's, too quickly. Needed a resize. I frowned. A resize? After 7 years? She shrugged, finally glancing up with a hint of irritation. Yeah, fingers change, you know? I didn't press further, though her explanation was absurd. Her fingers hadn't changed. She was the same Jessica. In fact, she seemed fitter and more put together lately. She'd been going to the gym more often and spending extra time in front of the mirror, trying new styles. I thought it was for herself, maybe to shake off the monotony. But now, the missing ring planted a seed of suspicion in my mind. 2 weeks later, I got my first undeniable clue. Jessica said she'd be out late with a new networking group. I'm not a jealous person and never minded her going out alone. But this time, something felt off. I decided to test her. Which group is that? I asked as casually as I could. Her answer came too fast. Just some work friends. You wouldn't know them. I hadn't expected specific names, but her dismissiveness irritated me. Jessica usually shared every detail of her life, sometimes too much. Now, her words were clipped and guarded. That Saturday, I decided to check out her networking group unannounced. After checking her planner and her favorite new restaurant spots, I had a pretty good idea where she might be. When I walked into the bar, I spotted her immediately. Not with colleagues, not even with friends. She was leaning into a man I'd never seen before, her hand on his arm, her laugh too loud and overly familiar. For a moment, I froze. This can't be happening. But then she touched his face, her fingers brushing his cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. Something inside me snapped. I didn't confront her. Instead, I stayed hidden, watching how they talked, how close they were, how her lips hovered near his ear. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was comfortable with it. When she kissed him, I left. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the scene, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. By the time I got home, Jessica was already in bed. Her phone sat on the counter, glowing with notifications. For the first time, I picked it up. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was. His name, Mark. Flirty messages that left no doubt, inside jokes we hadn't shared in years. But the one that broke me was simple. Can't wait to see you again tonight. You're worth the risk. She thought I'd left the party in a huff, but I was planning my revenge. The next morning, I got up before her. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, I stared blankly out the window, running through every way I could confront her. But that would be too easy. She didn't deserve easy. Jessica walked in around 9, her hair messy, wearing my sweatshirt over her leggings like everything was normal. My jaw clenched. I wanted to shout, demand answers. Instead, I stayed calm. Not yet. Morning, she said lightly, grabbing her favorite mug and pouring coffee, humming an annoying tune. I couldn't resist. How was the networking event last night? Her hand froze for a second, so subtle, almost unnoticeable, but I caught it. She recovered quickly, turning with a fake smile I wanted to wipe off her face. Good. Lots of small talk, you know. Yeah, I replied, swirling my coffee. Funny, I was in the area last night. Thought I'd stop by, but I couldn't find you." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, we left early and went somewhere quieter." The lies flowed easily, like second nature. It disgusted me. "Right," I said, holding her gaze. She looked away first, pretending to sip her coffee. Then I saw it. Her red dress from last night crumpled on the chair by the door. A faint, dark smudge marked the collar. Lipstick. Jessica only wore nude shades. I picked up the dress. She stiffened. "You're getting sloppy, Jess," I said, my voice low. Her head snapped up, confusion flaring before she masked it with practiced calm. "What's that supposed to mean?" I held the dress up, pointing to the stain. I was planning my next move when Jessica stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door like a sulky teenager. I remained in place, my fists clenched so tightly they ached, but I couldn't stop now. She thought she could hide, regroup, and twist the story like she always did. Not this time. As her footsteps thudded above, I stared at the second phone in my hand. She believed she had taken it back, but I managed to grab it again when she wasn't paying attention. Her messages with Mark were my next target. I wasn't satisfied with just reading their chat history. I needed to know exactly who this guy was. If he thought he could waltz into my life and take what I had built, he was sorely mistaken. I opened the messages and scrolled to the start of their conversation. It began innocently enough, with a discussion about a mutual project. Mark's full name appeared at the top of one email Jessica had forwarded to herself. That was all the information I needed. I pulled out my laptop and entered his name into every social media platform I could think of. Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Bingo! Mark was a cliche. His Instagram was filled with gym selfies, expensive dinners, and motivational quotes about success and living fully. He even had a highlight reel titled My People, where Jessica's face appeared in several clips. The videos enraged me. In one, she laughed while Mark held the camera close to her face. In another, she sat on his lap at a party, her head thrown back in carefree laughter. The captions were infuriating. "This one's trouble, but I love a challenge, and some risks are worth taking." What enraged me more than the blatant disrespect was how easy and public it all was. Mark wasn't worried about getting caught because Jessica hadn't bothered to set any boundaries. She was flaunting their relationship. On LinkedIn, I found more details. His job, office address, and gym. His carefully curated profile radiated arrogance. He probably believed he was untouchable. As I pieced together his world, a plan took shape. Jessica's betrayal was one thing, but Mark had willingly involved himself, making him fair game. I wasn't going to confront him directly. That would give them a chance to play the victims. No, I would tear their little fantasy world apart bit by bit. When Jessica came out of the bedroom under the pretense of grabbing a glass of water, I was already sending myself screenshots of their messages, photos, and his captions. She eyed me warily as I sat at the dining table, typing away. "Are you still sulking?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I didn't even glance up. "I'm just getting started." That shut her up. She hesitated, then walked back to the bedroom. Good, let her worry. By midnight, I had a comprehensive file on Mark that would make a private investigator envious. I knew where he worked, his hobbies, and his routines. I had all the ammunition I needed to make his life as miserable as he had made mine. The first step was simple. His company had a public email directory for clients. I composed a carefully worded email to his boss, attaching screenshots of his Instagram posts and messages with Jessica. My tone was professional, polite, and dripping with plausible deniability. Subject, concern regarding employee conduct. Dear manager's name, I hope this message finds you well. I recently came across some Instagram posts involving one of your employees, Mark, last name, which raised concerns about his professional behavior. The content includes references to inappropriate workplace relationships. I thought it best to bring this to your attention. Please let me know if you need additional information. Best regards, a concerned party. I didn't sign my name. There was no need. By the time Mark felt the fallout, he'd know exactly where it came from. Hitting send gave me a rush of satisfaction. Jessica and Mark thought I wouldn't notice. They were wrong. The first domino had tipped, and I was eager to see the rest fall. The next morning, Jessica pretended nothing had happened. She waltzed into the kitchen in her favorite silk robe, humming as she pulled out a mixing bowl. "Want pancakes?" she asked like we were having a peaceful Sunday morning. I stared at her, amazed by her nerve. She was playing house, pretending our marriage wasn't in ruins. I nearly laughed. Almost. "No thanks," I said flatly, folding my arms. "I lost my appetite when you decided to sit on Mark's lap." Her hands froze, the whisk clinking against the bowl. She turned to me, her face tense. "Are we doing this again?" she snapped. "You're imagining things. I told you, he's just a friend." The audacity. You mean the friend who texts you that you're like fire in his arms? The friend whose lap you sat on in the dress you bought for our anniversary dinner? I let each word drip with venom. Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, her defenses rising like clockwork. "You've been spying on my phone? That's a huge violation of trust." I couldn't believe it. She was playing the victim. The irony almost made me laugh. "Violation of trust," I repeated, standing up. "You're cheating on me, and I'm the one betraying trust? Do you even hear yourself?" She rolled her eyes, a flicker of anger breaking through her fake calm. I wasn't sure what she thought I had seen, but she was determined to downplay it. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Mark and I didn't even—" I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. I've read the messages, seen the photos. You can lie to yourself if you want, but don't insult me by lying to my face." She was silent for a moment, her mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came. Finally, she set the bowl down and crossed her arms. "Fine," she said icily. "What do you want me to say? That I messed up? That I was lonely? You're no saint yourself. You're always busy with work, wrapped up in your own world, barely noticing me." Ah, there it was, the blame game. The twisted reasoning that somehow made her betrayal my fault. "Don't," I said, my voice low and steady. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. You had choices, Jess. You could have talked to me. You could have ended this marriage if you were so unhappy. But instead, you chose to deceive me, to sneak around, and to humiliate me." Her jaw clenched, her composure starting to crumble. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice quieter now. "It wasn't supposed to turn out like this." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Then tell me, how was it supposed to play out? Were you hoping I'd just ignore it while you played house with Mark? Or were you planning to dump me when it was convenient for you?" Her silence gave me the answer I needed. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. We both glanced at it simultaneously, and I didn't miss the way her face tightened when Mark's name appeared on the screen. "Go ahead," I said, nodding toward the phone. "Answer it. Or better yet, put it on speaker. Let's hear what your friend has to say." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the phone before she declined the call and shoved it into her pocket. I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Jessica opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say a word, I played my trump card. "By the way," I said nonchalantly, grabbing my coffee mug and heading for the door, "you might want to warn your boyfriend. His boss is going to have an interesting morning. I sent him a few things." Her eyes widened with panic. "What did you do?" I smirked coldly. "Just making sure Mark stays accountable. He is a professional after all." Her expression was a mix of shock and rage. But I didn't stick around to see her reaction. I walked out, leaving her clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. This wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But the unraveling had begun, and I wasn't going to stop until their fantasy world was in ruins. The fallout happened quicker than I'd anticipated. By noon, Mark's Instagram account went dark. His gym selfies, cheesy motivational quotes, and highlight reels disappeared, leaving a blank profile. It felt like watching a monument collapse in real time. Jessica spent the day in the bedroom, pacing back and forth with her phone glued to her ear. She thought a closed door could give her privacy, but our walls were thin. I could hear her panicked voice, the frantic whispers as she tried to salvage the situation. "What do you mean he knows? Who told him?" "I don't care if your boss is mad. Fix it. This wasn't supposed to get out." I smirked. How quickly the mighty were falling. That evening, Jessica finally emerged. Her eyes were narrowed, her shoulders rigid. She was ready to fight, but I wasn't backing down. She stood in the living room, gripping her phone like a weapon. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice cold and sharp. I looked up from my laptop, pretending to scroll through emails. "What needed to be done?" I said, leaning back. "Mark wanted to play games. I just raised the stakes." Her jaw tightened, but I caught a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You had no right," she hissed. "This was between us. You dragged him into it." I stood slowly, my hands resting on the table. "You brought him into it the moment you decided to cheat. Don't act like you're innocent here. You made this mess. Now deal with the fallout." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you realize what you've done? Mark could lose his job." I raised an eyebrow. "Good. Maybe he'll learn not to mess with someone else's wife." The silence was thick, her face contorted, emotions battling for control, anger, shame, desperation. Finally, she turned away, running a hand through her hair. "You're a vindictive bastard," she muttered. I shrugged. "And you're a liar." Looks like we're both learning new things about each other. As the tension mounted, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it at first, but when it buzzed a second time, she couldn't resist. She glanced at the screen and froze. Her reaction was all the confirmation I needed. "Go ahead," I said, gesturing at the phone. "Answer it, or are you afraid of what he'll say?" She hesitated, then finally pressed the green button and put the phone to her ear. "What?" she snapped, her voice low. I stayed rooted, watching her closely. "No, I don't know how he found out," she hissed, pacing the room. "I'm handling it. Stop calling me." She hung up and turned to me, her composure unraveling. "You think this is funny?" she shouted. "You think destroying someone's life makes you the better person?" I laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about wrecking lives? You did that the moment you decided I wasn't enough. Don't try to guilt me for cleaning up your mess." She threw her hands up in frustration. "What do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry you're too boring to keep me interested. Is that what you want to hear?" Her words struck like a hammer, but I didn't let it show. I smiled coldly. "Thank you," I said calmly. She frowned. "For what?" "For showing me exactly who you are," I replied, walking past her. I didn't feel any remorse for what was about to unfold. Jessica shouted after me, but I ignored her. My focus had shifted. This wasn't just about Jessica or Mark anymore. It was about ensuring I came out of this wreckage stronger while they dealt with the chaos they had created. And I was only getting started. Jessica was unraveling faster than I'd expected. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by frantic energy and constant whispers on her phone. Whenever I entered the room, she'd tense up and lower her voice, thinking she could still hide her secrets. She didn't realize I was already steps ahead. By midweek, the cracks in Mark's life were becoming visible. A quick look at his LinkedIn profile confirmed he was on leave. A few discreet conversations with mutual contacts painted a grim picture. Mark had been summoned to an HR meeting after someone shared compromising evidence of his misconduct. He left the meeting visibly shaken, and rumors about an inappropriate relationship with a married client, Jessica, had started to spread. Jessica never brought it up. She maintained her usual facade, acting like pretending everything was fine could erase the mess I'd set in motion. But I wasn't satisfied with rumors and awkward HR conversations. I wanted closure. That evening, while Jessica went out to clear her head, I dug deeper into her second phone. Among her messages with Mark, I found exactly what I needed, a plan for one last meeting. Their texts made it obvious they didn't believe it would actually be their final goodbye. The details were clear. Friday night, 8 p.m., at a small cafe downtown. It was perfect. The next day, I finalized my preparations, ensuring every part of my plan was ready. When Friday arrived, Jessica was tense but resolute. She avoided looking at me the entire afternoon, confirming she intended to stick to her plan. At 6:30, she announced she was going out for a work dinner, slipping into heels and grabbing her bag. Her voice was overly casual, as though trying too hard not to sound suspicious. I merely nodded, watching her leave. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my keys and followed. I didn't head straight to the cafe. Instead, I parked a block away and waited. When Jessica arrived, she slipped inside, and I spotted Mark sitting by the window, his body language tense. Jessica joined him, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. It hurt, I won't deny that. Watching her look at him the way she once looked at me churned my stomach, but I shoved the feeling aside. I couldn't afford to lose focus now. From my car, I took photos of their meeting, capturing their affectionate interaction. They weren't being subtle. Jessica leaned in, touching his arm, her body language warm and welcoming. Mark looked uneasy, glancing around as though expecting someone to interrupt them, someone like me. But I didn't confront them. I wanted them to think they had gotten away with it. I waited until Jessica left and then followed Mark to his house. I parked a few doors down from his bland suburban rental, watching as he turned on the lights. Then I made my move. When Mark opened the door, he looked pale and exhausted. Panic flickered across his face when he saw me standing there. "We need to talk," I said, stepping forward before he could shut the door. He stammered, trying to pull himself together. "Listen, I don't know what you think." "Save it," I snapped. "I don't care about your explanations. This isn't a discussion. It's a warning." He blinked, clearly shaken. "You've already lost your job," I said, my tone cold and steady. "But if you think that's the end, you're mistaken. Stay away from my wife. Got it?" Mark raised his hands defensively. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to—" I said, "Do you hear me?" I repeated, my voice icy. He nodded quickly, his face drained of color. "Yes, I hear you." I stared at him a moment longer, letting my words sink in. Then I turned and walked away, leaving behind a man who thought he could take what was mine without consequences. When I got home, Jessica was already in bed, or at least pretending to be. Good. Let her think she had fooled me again. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to the next phase of my plan, and she wouldn't see it coming. The morning after her secret meeting, I was up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen, but my mind was already racing with what needed to be done next. This was no longer about revenge. It was about exposing every single lie Jessica had told. She was still asleep when I launched Phase 2. I went to the closet where her designer bags and carefully arranged scarves were kept. Hidden inside one of her favorite purses was the receipt I had planted, a printed copy of the cafe bill with Mark's signature. I placed it on the kitchen counter, right where she would see it while making her morning coffee. The trap was ready. Jessica finally appeared around 9:30, wearing an oversized sweater and looking half asleep. She barely glanced at me while pouring her coffee until her eyes landed on the receipt. She froze. "What's this?" she asked, trying to sound neutral, though the tension in her voice was obvious. I shrugged, flipping through a newspaper as though I couldn't care less. "Looks like something you left in your bag." Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the receipt and read it. When she saw the name, her face turned pale. "Why are you going through my things?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I was just verifying your work dinner from last night," I replied casually. "Looks like I found what I needed." Jessica slammed the receipt onto the counter. "Unbelievable. Now you're spying on me? Going through my stuff like some jealous maniac?" "Stop!" I snapped, cutting her off. "We're way past pretending this is my fault. You lied again, Jess. And this time, you weren't even clever enough to cover your tracks." Her jaw clenched, but for once, she didn't deny it. She looked genuinely trapped. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "An apology? Fine, I'm sorry, okay? I messed up. I hurt you. There, are you satisfied? Can we move on now?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Move on? You think we can just sweep this under the rug? Do you even realize what you've done? Or are you too wrapped up in your own delusions to see the damage you caused?" Her eyes darted around, searching for an excuse, a way out. Finally, she sank into the chair across from me, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she muttered. "But it did," I shot back, "and now we're here. So what are you going to do about it?" She looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret, but her next words shattered any hope of fixing this. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't even know if I want to." Her confession pierced through me like a blade. "You don't know if you want to?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. She shook her head, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I didn't plan for this to happen, but I haven't been happy for a long time, and I don't think you have either." I stared at her, the weight of her words settling in. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a rejection of me, of everything we had built together. Slowly, I stood up. Thanks for clearing that up, I said coldly. It makes what I'm about to do a lot easier. Jessica frowned, confusion crossing her face. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. I grabbed my jacket and walked out, leaving her sitting there, clutching the receipt like it was the last shred of a life she had already destroyed. I didn't know where I was headed, but one thing was clear: the mirror had shattered, and there was no fixing it. All that was left was to cut the final thread tying me to her. I drove aimlessly, the sound of the engine and the tires on the road grounding me. Jessica's words replayed in my mind. I don't think I want to fix this. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the finality of it. She had made her decision. For the first time, I realized I wasn't angry. I was free. When I finally parked at a small park, the sun was high in the sky. I sat on a weathered bench, staring at my phone. The evidence I had collected sat neatly in a folder. Screenshots of texts, photos of Jessica and Mark, and that receipt from their cafe meeting. I scrolled through it one last time, tempted to delete everything and walk away. But then I remembered the lies, the disrespect, and her audacity. No, she didn't deserve to walk away unscathed. I opened my messaging app and drafted a group text to Jessica, Mark, her family, and our closest friends. Subject: transparency. I think it's time everyone knows the truth. Jessica, these are your messages with Mark, your meetings, and your lies. You betrayed me and our marriage. I deserve better than the web of deceit you've spun. Consider this my final goodbye. I attached the evidence and hit send. The message showed as delivered. Just like that, it was out of my hands. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. First, it was Jessica. Jessica, are you serious? What the hell is wrong with you? You're ruining my life. I didn't reply. Then her sister, Laura. Laura, is this true? Oh my God, I can't believe this. Jess said she was happy. What happened? I ignored that too. Finally, Mark. Mark, what's your problem, man? Why are you dragging everyone into this? This time I responded, Me? My problem? My problem is you thought you could sleep with my wife and get away with it. Welcome to the consequences, Mark. Then I blocked him. The ripple effect spread quickly. When I returned home, Jessica was on the couch, her face streaked with tears, phone clutched tightly in her hand. She glared at me with pure venom. You ruined everything, she spat, her voice hoarse. Do you even realize what you've done? I dropped my keys on the counter and faced her. Ruined everything? I echoed, my voice calm. No, Jessica. You ruined everything the moment you decided I wasn't enough. I just made sure everyone saw the truth. Her hand shook, her breathing ragged. I hate you, she hissed, each word dripping with venom. I chuckled bitterly. Good. That makes this easier. I walked past her into the bedroom and grabbed the suitcase I had packed that morning. I didn't need much, just the essentials. Jessica didn't say anything as I headed for the door. I paused and glanced back. You're right, Jessica, I said, my voice steady and firm. I wasn't happy either, but at least I stayed faithful. Her face crumpled at that, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. For the first time in months or maybe years, I felt a sense of relief. The ties of lies, betrayal, and resentment had finally been cut. I wasn't sure what lay ahead, but I knew one thing. It would be on my terms, without her. I didn't go far, initially. I checked into a budget hotel on the outskirts of town, a small space where I could think without Jessica's presence, suffocating me. That first night, sleep eluded me. My mind raced with thoughts of what I had done and what still needed to be done. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Jessica had sent more messages than I could count, some full of anger and blame. Jessica, you've destroyed my reputation. Jessica, everyone thinks I'm a cheater because of you. You're pathetic. Others were manipulative, begging me to reconsider. Jessica, you didn't have to do this. We could have fixed things. Jessica, please, just talk to me. We can work this out. I ignored every one of them. The real surprise came from those around us. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances, reaching out to share their thoughts. Jessica's mother was the first to call, her voice trembling as she tried to understand. Is this true? she asked, hoping I would deny it. Every word, I replied simply. She sighed deeply. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry, but she's still my daughter. I couldn't blame her. Family loyalty often endures, even when the truth is harsh. Then my best friend Mike called. His reaction was a blend of disbelief and anger. I never liked her, he admitted after hearing the full story. I didn't want to say anything, but there was always something off about her. You deserve better, man. I wasn't sure if his words comforted or upset me more. The most unexpected message, however, came from Laura, Jessica's sister. Laura, I'm sorry you're going through this. Jess has always thought she could get away with anything. I'm glad someone finally called her out. I didn't reply, but her words stayed with me. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was about who Jessica truly was. By the second day, Jessica stopped messaging, but the damage had spread. Word had gotten back to Mark's workplace that his leave was now indefinite. Friends who had once supported Jessica began avoiding her, too embarrassed to be connected to her mess. Then came the final decision. I filed for divorce. It wasn't easy, even after everything. 7 years of marriage isn't something you can simply erase. But Jessica's choices had brought us to this point, and there was no going back. The papers were delivered to her that afternoon. She didn't call or text this time. Instead, I received a single email later that evening. Jessica, I got the papers. I don't know what to say anymore. I never meant for this to happen, but I know I can't fix it. I hope you find someone who makes you happy one day. It was the closest she'd come to taking responsibility, but it didn't matter. I had already accepted what needed to be done. As I stared at the email in that small hotel room, I realized something. The anger was gone. Not the searing rage that pushed me to expose her lies, nor the hollow pain of betrayal. I felt free. Jessica's world was collapsing, and Mark was being dragged down with her. But for once, I wasn't falling with them. I had a clean slate, free from lies and doubt, and I was ready to embrace it. The day after filing for divorce, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the gym. Not the half-hearted workouts Jessica used to pester me about, but a real sweat-dripping, heart-pounding session. Every rep and every mile on the treadmill felt like shedding layers of my past. Jessica, Mark, the lies, and the humiliation. I left it all behind, one bead of sweat at a time. That evening, I sat in my hotel room with a pen and notepad. I've never been much of a writer, but I needed to organize my thoughts. What should I do now? Where should I go from here? The life I had spent over a decade building was gone, shattered by Jessica's choices. But that also meant I had a fresh start, a chance to create something new. The first thing on my list was practical. Find a new place to live. The house Jessica and I shared was tainted by memories of betrayal. She could have it. I didn't want anything to do with it. The second item was personal. Reconnect with myself. Over the years, I had put so much effort into keeping our relationship afloat that I lost sight of who I was. What did I love? What made me happy? These questions were both terrifying and exhilarating. The third was simple yet profound. Surround myself with people who genuinely cared. And that's what I did. In the following weeks, I reached out to old friends, people I had drifted away from because Jessica didn't approve, or because I was too busy trying to be the ideal husband. I went out for beers with Mike, caught up with some old college friends, and even reconnected with my younger sister, who had always seen through Jessica's facade. When I told her everything, she just said, "It's about time. You've always deserved better." Those words hit differently now. In the past, I would have brushed them off as simple sibling loyalty. But this time, I started to believe them. Meanwhile, Jessica was desperately trying to put her life back together. The divorce papers had sent shockwaves through her world. Friends stopped answering her calls, her family began to distance themselves, and even Mark went completely silent. One evening, she sent me a lone text. "Jessica, I miss us." I stared at the message for a long while. The words felt familiar, yet empty. This was the Jessica I had fallen for, the one who always knew exactly what to say, even if she didn't mean it. but I was no longer that person. I didn't miss us because I wasn't sure we had ever truly existed. Me, I don't. I never heard from her after that. Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself. I threw my energy into work, picked up hobbies I'd long wanted to try, boxing, cooking, even dabbling in photography. Each step felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried for years. The biggest change came when I found a new place to live. It was a small, cozy apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. No shared memories, no reminders of betrayal, just a clean slate. The first picture I hung on the wall was a sunset skyline, the colors vivid and full of promise. It was a reminder that even after the darkest storms, there is still light on the horizon. The life I knew was over, but for the first time in years, I was okay with that. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't trapped by Jessica's lies or Mark's interference. I was free and ready to move forward. The months that followed felt strange at first. Living without Jessica was almost surreal. No arguments over dinner plans, no tense silences about her suspicious late nights, no waking up to find her secretly texting someone. The quiet was unsettling at first, but soon it became comforting. The divorce went through faster than I expected. Jessica didn't contest it. In fact, she barely engaged at all. Her lawyer handled most of her responses, and in the end, she kept the house, the ring, and the remnants of our life together. I walked away with the things that mattered: my self-respect, my freedom, and the certainty that I would never again settle for being treated like an afterthought. The final papers arrived on a rainy Thursday. I remember holding the envelope, reading the bold words, "Final Decree of Divorce." It should have felt like an ending, but instead it felt like a new beginning. I tossed the envelope on the counter, grabbed my keys, and drove to a lake I used to visit as a teenager. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp and clean. Sitting on the hood of my car, I looked out at the water and let myself imagine a future, not the one I'd planned with Jessica, but something real, something better. As time passed, the sharp sting of betrayal faded to a dull ache. Occasionally, I'd hear from mutual friends about Jessica. They mentioned how she was struggling to rebuild her life, how her reputation was ruined, and how her relationship with Mark had fallen apart almost immediately after the truth came out. A part of me thought I should feel satisfied with her downfall, but all I felt was pity. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. As for me, I was thriving. My career took off in unexpected ways. Free from emotional baggage, I threw myself into work, earned a promotion, and saved enough to start thinking about bigger dreams. I began traveling, visiting places I had always wanted to see but never prioritized. Somewhere along the way, I met someone. Her name was Claire. We met at a photography workshop, both of us awkwardly fumbling with our cameras during a sunset shoot. She laughed at my awful jokes, and I realized I was smiling more in that one afternoon than I had in the past 7 years. Claire was different. She didn't play games, didn't make excuses, and made me feel like I mattered. It was early, and we were taking things slow. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something I thought I'd lost: hope. Looking back, I have no regrets. Not about the marriage, the heartbreak, or the messy unraveling of it all. Those experiences taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. I learned to trust my instincts, to stand up for myself, and to never settle for less than I deserved. If you're reading this and going through something similar, my advice is simple: don't let someone else's betrayal define you. Don't stay where you're undervalued, disrespected, or ignored. You're worth so much more, even if it takes time to believe it. No matter how bleak things seem now, there's always a way forward, and sometimes that path leads to something better than you ever imagined. For me, that's what this journey became: a painful, messy, yet liberating road to a new life. And I'm never looking back.